Welcome to all the old, new demigods, monsters, and gods alike to the Olympus Report. How did Disney Plus's Percy Jackson hold up as an adaptation? Well, let's take a look in my newest episode of Adaptation or Not to Adaptation. Percy Jackson and the Olympians on Disney Plus was a fantastic show, but it was a good adaptation. Well, it was certainly better than the movie. At least it told the same story as the book, but it wasn't the perfect adaptation we were all expecting. So let's take a closer look at what they changed and what they kept the same. Up first, what stayed the same. Percy is a troubled kid who struggles to fit in at school and make friends. He has ADHD and dyslexia. His only friend is Grover Underwood. They attend Yancey Academy. The school goes on a field trip to the Met. Mr. Brunner, their school teacher, teaches them about Greek gods and Greek myths. During lunch, Percy and Grover are picked on by the school bully Nancy Bobafit. She throws her lunch at Grover. Percy gets so angry that Nancy ends up in the school fountain even though Percy didn't touch her. Mrs. Dodds confronts Percy and turns into a monster and attacks Percy. Percy manages to vaporize her with a pen that Mr. Brunner gave to him, a pen that turned into a sword. Afterwards, no one remembers Mrs. Dodds. Percy is expelled from school and returns home to his mom, Sally Jackson, who loves him above all else and gives him blue candy as a welcome home gift. Percy's stepdad, Gabe, is a low-life bum. Sally and Percy go to Montauk Beach to a cabin that they always stay in. During a thunderstorm, Grover shows up and tells them that they are being chased and need to leave now. Sally drives them towards Camp Half-Blood, where Grover, who is actually a satyr, a half-goat, half-man, tells Percy that the Greek gods are real. The car crashes when the Minotaur catches up with them. Sally is seemingly crushed by the Minotaur, and Percy defeats the monster with its own horn. Percy wakes up at Camp Half-Blood, where he meets the camp director, Mr. D, aka Dionysus, who can't seem to remember Percy's name and calls him Peter Johnson. And Mr. Brunner is actually a centaur named Chiron. Percy gets settled in at camp in the Hermes cabin as he has not been claimed yet and meets Luke, who he forms a friendship with. Percy struggles to find something he's good at. Percy gets picked on by Clarice, a daughter of Ares. She tries to shove his head in a toilet, but the toilet ends up exploding and dousing Clarice. Annabeth watches Percy intently, hoping he will be the one to allow her to go on a quest. And she uses Percy to win Capture the Flag by using him as bait to lure Clarice away from the flag. Annabeth has a Yankees cap that turns her invisible, a gift from her mom. Percy manages to defeat Clarice once near the water and is claimed as a son of Poseidon. Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades made a pact to have no more children, as they were too powerful, so Percy is considered a forbidden child. Thalia, a daughter of Zeus, was a friend of Annabeth and Luke who never made it to camp, as she sacrificed herself and Zeus turned her into a pine tree. She was another forbidden child. Zeus's master bowl has been stolen and Zeus thinks Percy took it, so Percy must get it back by the summer solstice or Zeus and Poseidon will go to war. Everyone thinks Hades stole the bowl, so Percy must head to LA where the entrance to the Underworld is located. Percy takes Annabeth and Grover on the quest with him. Luke gives Percy some flying shoes before Percy goes on the quest. However, since Zeus has it out for Percy, he can't use them as the sky is Zeus's domain, so Grover ends up using them. They take a bus to New Jersey, which is attacked by Mrs. Dodds, aka one of the Furies, Hades' monsters. Afterwards, our trio ends up in the woods. Percy has nightmares about a voice calling out to him. They encounter Medusa and chop her head off and ship it to Olympus. Grover finds a statue of his uncle Ferdinand. Afterwards, they get on a train. Annabeth reveals that she ran away from her family when she was 7, as she started having a rocky relationship with her father after he remarried and had more children. Grover reveals that it's his dream to obtain his Searcher's license, which will allow him to look for the lost god of the wild, Pan. This is a dream of all satyrs. They end up in St. Louis and visit the archway where they're attacked by Echidna and the Chimera. Percy falls out of the arch and ends up in the river where Nereid tells Percy to go to Santa Monica. Percy discovers that he can breathe underwater. Percy is now a wanted fugitive. Our heroes meet Ares, god of war, at a diner and he has them retrieve his shield from Waterland in exchange for a ride and his help. Percy and Annabeth get the shield and escape Hephaestus' trap. They get in the ride prepared by Ares, which has animals in horrible conditions. Ares also gives them a backpack. Once in Las Vegas, they end up freeing the animals. They go to the Lotus Hotel and Casino, where time moves differently, and end up staying there for days rather than hours. They leave and head to Santa Monica. Percy talks to the Nereid, who gives him pearls in order to escape the Underworld. They encounter Krusty, aka Procrusteus, the Stretcher, but escape and head to the Underworld. Once there, they encounter Charon and Cerberus. They use a rubber ball to distract Cerberus and head towards Hades' mansion. The winged shoes almost drag Grover into a pit, the pit of Tartarus, but the shoes manage to slip off his hooves easier than they would human feet. They meet Hades, who doesn't have the bolt, and in fact his Helm of Darkness has also been stolen, and Hades thinks Percy took it. Percy doesn't have it, but what Percy does have is the bolt that materialized in his backpack that Ares gave him. Hades doesn't want it or war, he just wants his helm back in exchange for Percy's mom. Percy realizes that the voice that's been talking to him is Kronos, and he must be behind this whole scheme. Percy must leave his mom behind and escape the Underworld, where he confronts Ares. Percy uses the ocean to beat Ares and return the helm to Alecto. Percy goes to Olympus, where he confronts Zeus and gives back the bolt. Zeus lets him live. Poseidon and Percy meet for the first time and have a heart-to-heart. Percy goes back to camp a hero. Luke is revealed to be the lightning thief and has been working for Kronos to overthrow the gods. Luke escapes camp. Annabeth goes home to give her dad another chance. Percy returns home to Sally, who has been returned by Hades. Grover gets his searcher's license. Gabe is turned into a statue. Okay, not bad. Like I said, all the main plot points were there, but not all the details were the same. So now let's talk what they changed. Mr. Brunner does not talk about Kronos at the Met. In fact, Kronos isn't brought up until our heroes meet Ares, and this conversation is had with Ares instead of Chiron, aka Mr. Brunner. Mr. Brunner in the book took back Riptide from Percy after the Mrs. Dodds incident. In the book, while at camp, Percy struggled to find a sword that felt right in his hand, and didn't get Riptide back until he went on the quest. In the book, Grover did not snitch on Percy like in the show. Percy was simply just not invited back to the school the following year, but Percy did get to finish out the current year at Yancey. Grover was supposed to accompany Percy back to New York on the bus. This is where Percy and Grover encountered the three Fates. Instead, in the show, Grover and Annabeth encounter the Fates at the St. Louis Archway. Gabe is a lot less abusive in the show. Sally tells Percy about the gods and that he's a demigod at the cabin, something that she was very hesitant to tell him in the book. In fact, Percy didn't find out all this information until he got to camp in the book. Percy has Riptide in the Minotaur fight, and Grover is not knocked unconscious. Percy doesn't meet Annabeth until much later in the show compared to the book. In the book, Annabeth gave Percy the Tor, not Chiron. The sword training session with Luke happens in real time instead of in a flashback. And Luke and Percy weren't alone. They were surrounded by several campers. And in fact, Percy was able to beat Luke after he doused some water on his head. Percy also spent way more time at camp in the book, approximately 2 weeks. Grover visits the Council of Cloven Elders, something that did not happen in the book until book 4. Grover is the one who finds out about Hades taking Sally, something that Percy didn't find out till much later in the books in a dream. Percy doesn't give the flying shoes to Grover right away. Grover just kinda ends up taking them during the fight with Medusa. In the book, the bus they were on was actually attacked while they were driving, and Percy was the one to defeat the Furies, not Annabeth. Alecto does not follow them to Medusa in the book. Medusa in the book is just a monster that wants to turn them into statues. In the show, her character is given way more depth. In the book, they use a glass ball to kill her, not Annabeth's hat. Percy wants to use the hat to hide the head in the show, something that was not brought up in the book. In the book, they actually find the address to the Underworld in Medusa's lair. The heart-to-heart conversation that Percy and Annabeth have, where they start to become friends, happens on the truck ride to Vegas in the book rather than on the train to St. Louis. In the show, we get various flashbacks to little Percy, something not depicted in the book. In the show, Percy also has a slight fear of water. This was definitely not in the book. In fact, in the book, Percy stated that he always felt a sense of calm near the water. They encounter Echidna on the train first instead of the archway. In the book, the archway was just a fun pit stop. In the show, it's a temple of Athena. that they seek out to hide. Athena also never got mad at Annabeth in the book. Grover and Annabeth had already left by the time Percy got attacked in the book. Percy falls out of the arch in the show on accident, opposed to purposely jumping out in the book. Percy overcomes his fear of water, but unlike in the book, Percy gets wet. In the book, Percy stayed dry in water unless he wanted to get wet. In the book, they get back on the train. In the show, they end up walking and run into Ares on the road, who invites them to the diner. Grover is left behind with Ares while Percy and Annabeth head to Waterland. In the book, they all went to Waterland. Grover has a conversation with Ares where Grover accuses Ares of knowing who stole the bowl. This conversation was absent from the book, as like I said, they had all gone to retrieve Ares' shield. The amusement park in the show is actually built by Hephaestus. The trap in the show is way more involved. In the book, they just had to get past some nets and mechanical spiders. In the show, one must sacrifice themselves to Hera's throne, which will trap them. Percy makes the sacrifice and Hephaestus shows up. In the books, Hephaestus did not show up until book 4. Hephaestus, after listening to Annabeth, releases Percy. Ares actually tells them to go to the Lotus Hotel instead of them just accidentally ending up there. On the truck, they iris message Luke instead of earlier before they meet Ares. Annabeth, Grover, and Percy tell Luke that they think Clarice is the lightning thief, something they never thought in the book. In the book, they get sucked in and just have fun in the hotel until Percy figures something is up. In the show, they are told to find Hermes, who will help them. Hermes in the books didn't show up until book 2. Information about Luke and Luke's mom is revealed way earlier than in the book series. This information wasn't brought up until book 5. Grover also gets sidetracked in the hotel by another satyr who was not in the book. They leave by stealing Hermes' car instead of getting in a normal cab. Hermes' car instantly transports them to Santa Monica. The winter solstice has passed, something that did not happen in the book. Percy meets the Nereid, and she gives him 4 pearls instead of 3. The dreams that Percy has in the show are also slightly different from the ones in the book. Just Percy confronts Krusty, and Annabeth and Grover don't get trapped first. In the show, Charon is not the one to take them to the Underworld. In the book, they met Charon at a place called DOA Recording Studios. Charon was a very greedy man in a very nice Italian suit, and they were able to bribe him to take them down to the Underworld. In the show, they encounter Charon after they get into the Underworld, and he's not greedy, and purposely sicks Cerberus on them, instead of them just encountering Cerberus in the book. In the show, Cerberus chases them and is way more of a threat. Annabeth not only uses the ball to distract him, but also pets him behind the ear. Grover almost gets eaten and loses one of his pearls. In the book, there are 3 main sections of the Underworld. The Fields of Punishment, where you go if you need to be punished. Asphodel, which is where most people go, who weren't particularly good or bad. And Elysium, where the best of the best went. Asphodel was described as a crowded airport. In the show, it's way more isolated and is described as a place you go when you have regrets. Annabeth is trapped there by a regret, and Percy and Grover have to leave her behind where she uses the pearl to escape. In the book, they all went to Hades. In the show, Percy discovers the bolt in his backpack before he heads to Hades. In the book, it wasn't until after he had confronted Hades. More flashbacks are included with Sally and Poseidon, showcasing more of Percy's childhood and the struggles he faced. Percy transports out of the Underworld, but instead of returning to Santa Monica like in the book, he is transported back to Montauk Beach in New York. In the book, after Percy defeated Ares, Ares was framed as Percy's kidnapper by the mortals, and all the destruction Percy had caused was him trying to escape, so Percy is no longer a fugitive. This explanation was left out in the show. Originally in the book, Percy took a plane ride back since he was still in California. In the book, Zeus did not believe Percy about Kronos and refused to hear anything about him. In the show, Zeus does believe Percy. Also, Zeus never tried to kill Percy in the book, so Poseidon didn't need to step in. This is mostly due to the fact that the solstice had not passed in the book, and therefore Zeus and Poseidon had never actually started the war with each other. The confrontation with Luke is also a bit different. Luke tries to kill Percy with a scorpion in the book, and Annabeth was not there. In the show, Luke tries to recruit Percy first, and only after he can't does he try to kill him. And of course, in the show, Annabeth shows up. The ending scene with Sally was also not in the book. Sally in the book purposely turned Gabe into a statue. In the show, it was an accident. So some big changes, but in my opinion, nothing that really took away from the main point of the story. but there were some things missing completely. So now let's talk what they left out. The name of Percy's sword, Riptide, is not mentioned once. Percy in the book spends a lot more time at Yancey. A conversation where Percy overhears Chiron and Grover talking about him is cut. The explanation of why Sally married Gabe is left out of the show. In the book, Sally suffered through Gabe's abuse because his awful smell prevented monsters from smelling Percy. The Hellhound attack in camp is completely missing during Capture the Flag. The explanation of camp necklaces is also left out of the show. Each bead on a camper's necklace stands for one summer that they spent at camp, and the biggest event of each summer is placed on the bead. For example, the summer that Luke and Annabeth came to camp, the bead had a pine tree on it for Thalia's sacrifice. Grover meets and befriends a pink poodle who allows our heroes to claim the reward money on him, and they use this money to buy the ticket for the train. Annabeth's love of architecture is also left out. Percy's power to talk to horses is also not mentioned. The DOA recording studio where the Underworld entrance was in the book is completely skipped over. But that's pretty much it, so not too bad. Now, this is an adaptation review. How well was the book material adapted to the TV show? So I do need to include character description. But before I get to that segment, I want to start by saying this is in no way me saying I am disappointed in the cast. Everyone did an absolutely phenomenal job of bringing their characters to life, and I would not have wanted anyone else in these roles. But I do need to talk about how they were adapted from the book to the show. So let's start with Percy. Percy had black hair and green eyes in the book, and in the show he has dirty blonde hair and blue eyes. Grover was described as having red curly hair and a goatee. Obviously, it would have been hard for a kid to have a goatee, so that is gone, and show Grover has darker hair. Annabeth was blonde in the book with gray eyes, but now has darker hair and brown eyes. Luke was blonde in the book, but now has brown hair. Clarice was described as very ugly and stout and bulky, and in the show is leaner and definitely not ugly. Chiron was described as a white stallion, but is now a black stallion. Hades was a lot more menacing in the book, having a cloak made up of lost souls. This was not the case in the show. Zeus was described as having electric blue eyes and shoulder-length hair. However, he is played by Lance Reddick in the show and has no hair. Hephaestus in the books is described as extremely ugly, but is played by Timothy Odmundson in the show. But I really like that they cast Timothy because Timothy is actually disabled in real life, and I feel this is way more meaningful than casting someone who looked exactly like Hephaestus was described. But those were the biggest differences. All the other characters were pretty spot on. And again, I would not have changed a single casting of this show. This adaptation was pretty damn good. Was it perfect? No, but it followed the main plot line of the book, unlike the movie. Overall, I give it a 7 out of 10. Do you agree with me? Let me know down in the comments below. But until next time, Half-Bloods, I'm signing off, so please always remember to stay safe.